Welcome back, CSE 3200 Yukon Stores. We're going to begin Chapter 9 today. And Chapter 9 is titled Fragments, a word that I may have mentioned in class, but there's been no context to it. But fragments is really where we've been going with Android development for quite some time now. I'm going to have a few objectives for this chapter, but about the only one I'm going to get through in this video is the need for user interface flexibility, which is what fragments are going to provide for us. I'm going to spend a lot of time here on this diagram trying to emphasize what the fragment is going to do. In criminal intent, the application that starts in Chapter 9 and probably takes us through Chapter 16, we're going to be making a list detail application. Now, this will be the final version of ours, at least a simplified diagram of the final version of ours, where we have a list that's in one screen entirely, and it will take us to another screen that is going to give us specific details entirely. But that is not the only thing that we could do with fragments. Okay, so here's another picture of something we could do with fragments, is that we could have on the very same screen a list, okay, right here, and then I could click maybe on item 7, let's suppose 7's right here, and then it would take me over here and populate this with a visual of all the details that belongs to item number 7. But then if I click up here on item number 2, I really don't see any change to the visual on the list, but detail gets completely remade. Okay, it's going to not show the user interface for item 7 anymore. It's going to show the user interface that represents item number 2. So I could have part of the screen being reused and repopulated while the other is still not, basically following its original functionality. This is not something we could have done in Robot. The key thing about in Robot was we had an activity over here, which was main activity, and it was taking us to a robot purchase, okay, which that was another activity. And we spent 3 days trying to get from here to there. Once just getting there, and passing along some information, and then passing some information to and passing information from so they could make use of it over here. Okay, that was always one activity to another. And that was one activity is one screen. And that's always the way it is. So fragments, it's more versatile, and we could have multiple views within the same user interface on the same screen. This over here is just a picture of, what if we rotated our phone and we had a lot more screen, I suppose, in order to demonstrate a list in this direction. Then maybe if we rotated our phone, we would want our list and our detail on one screen. Or maybe this is for a tablet, and it was always large enough in order to show 2 different views on the same screen. So that's probably where I would have used fragments for the first time. Whenever the tablet was created, we decided it's a whole big waste of space to have one activity on one screen. Imagine just having a calculator, and the buttons would be huge, and I have all this wasted space. So that's what fragments are about. I'll take you through the next couple of screens, which basically say a lot of what I had just mentioned. On this screen, it says that a fragment is responsible for its own view, and it's going to have its own layout file. And I have another diagram for that as well in a second. But this also kind of previews where we go and end Chapter 9, where we're just going to have the main activity host our fragment and do little else. Just gave you a second on that screen in order to read it, and that one as well. But here's where I'll spend a little bit more time before I end this video. So we're going to have a main activity, and whenever we get to Chapter 16, our main activity looks almost identical to our main activity at the very beginning of Chapter 9. There's almost no code there. Now, if you can imagine that in our robot app, we just kept adding to that and adding to that and adding to that, chapters 2, 3, and 4. But here, all it's going to do is just say, yeah, I want to come over to activity underscore main. I didn't notice the typo over there, activity underscore main.xml. So that's all it's going to do is it's going to point over here, and activity underscore main is going to say, well, we're going to hold a fragment. And that fragment will, at first, be the crime detail fragment. That'll be chapter 9. Okay, let me go back to this screen right here. And chapter 10 is more about the list, but it's more complicated to explain the list than it is to explain the detail screen. The detail screen is mostly going to pull us back into things that we've already known from chapter 1 through chapter 4. So it's going to be a nice, easy way to start. So we're going to actually kind of make our application artificially go right to a detail, but it'll just be a generic detail. And then we'll go, OK, we got that working. And then we'll get a list working. And once we get our list working towards the end of chapter 10, we'll make our application go here as a starting point instead. OK, but in chapter 9, we're going to create our crime detail fragment. It will have its own XML file. Now, we've created XML files before. Yeah, in chapter 7, when we created our activity, not only did the in-class activity and we made it its own file. When we made its own file, it just gave me a main activity by default and activity underscore main.xml by default, and it associated the two. Okay, but once we got to chapter 7, we created our own 2 files, and we made sure that they hooked up with each other. We're going to do the same thing here. So in our fragment underscore crime underscore detail XML, we'll have our visual. I'll actually show you the visual in just a second so you can see where we're going to go in the next video. And then the crime detail fragment is going to have the logic for what are we going to do with the things in that video. We're going to set our listeners and such. We'll also have a crime class, and that's going to be our data class. If I take you back to our objectives for the chapter, right here, we'll start our app, we'll create the data class, and we will host it. Here's one more thing I wanted to leave you with before I go, and I will bring this up again soon whenever it's relevant. But this is what our detail screen, or at least our generic detail screen, is going to look like. We're going to have a bunch of things to put in. This is just going to be a text box for a label. It's just a text box or text view. Okay, so a text view containing title, a text view containing details. This will be an edit text, something useful, where we can put in the title for our crime, and a button which will give me at first just whatever date I hard code, then whatever date that I create the crime in, and then whatever date I choose to put in there, and that's much later. And then I'm going to have a checkbox, okay? And that's what it's going to look like at the end of chapter 9. All right, I will see you in the next video.